You already know what to do. You just keep choosing not to do it. And the reason has nothing to do with confusion. It's because somewhere between the decision and the action, you keep checking something that was never meant to decide in the first place. And that check is so subtle that you don't even realize it's the exact moment you stop. This is about that moment, why it keeps happening, and why almost everything you delay was never waiting for you to feel ready. Chapter 1. The moment you disconnect. Riku didn't struggle with decisions. That's what made it harder to see. He knew what mattered. He chose clearly. But something kept happening right after. A small break, not visible, not dramatic. Just a slight distance between him and the action he had already decided on. And if you're honest, you felt this today. You sit there, knowing exactly what you need to do, and still something in you doesn't fully move with it. Not resistance, not confusion, just a lack of alignment. And that's where most people lie to themselves. They call it timing. They call it intuition. They call it not the right moment. But none of that is true. You already decided. You just didn't follow through. And the part you don't say out loud is that you've seen this happen so many times, you've quietly started to lose trust in yourself. Chapter 2. What you've been using as permission. Most people believe they should listen to how they feel, that feelings are signals. But in systems like Bushido, that idea doesn't exist. Emotion is not guidance. It is a reaction. And reactions are always late. They happen after your mind has already decided what something means, which creates a problem you've been living with for years. You think you're waiting for the right feeling, but you're actually waiting for permission from something that is constantly changing. You've done this more times than you can count. You knew. You always knew. And still, you checked again. Chapter 3. The moment you never see. There is a moment you have never paid attention to, because it happens too fast. Something appears, a task, a decision, and before you feel anything, your mind assigns meaning. This is annoying. This is difficult. This can wait. That meaning creates the emotion, not the other way around. And once the emotion appears, it feels like truth, like a valid reason to delay. But it isn't. It's the result of a decision you didn't notice making. Nothing about this is actually unclear. You just don't like acting without emotional agreement. It's not just that you stop. It's that every time you stop, something in you remembers it. And the next time you try, you're already carrying the weight of all the times you didn't. And this is where it becomes uncomfortable. Because if you slow this moment down, you can actually see it happen. The decision was already made. You just didn't stay with it. And the moment you left it, you called that feeling not ready. Chapter 4. Where control actually breaks. This is where Zanshin becomes real. Zanshin means you remain inside the action without adjusting yourself based on what you feel, which removes something you rely on constantly. Internal negotiation. Should I continue? Does this still feel right? The moment those questions appear, you've already lost control. Not because of emotion, because you gave it authority. You've experienced this. You were already doing the thing. Then you checked, and everything slowed down. Not because you couldn't continue, because you decided to listen. You never actually needed more motivation. You just needed to stop checking, because every time you check, you interrupt the action, and then blame the feeling for what you just broke yourself. Chapter 5. The truth that destroys the illusion. This is where most people think they understand. Okay, I just need to act anyway. But this is exactly where everything collapses again. Riku did that. He stopped waiting. He acted. And for a short time, it worked. Until something unexpected happened. It didn't feel better. No clarity, no momentum, just nothing. And that's when he stopped again. Not because it didn't work, because it didn't feel like it was working. You didn't stop because it failed. You stopped because it didn't make you feel like you mattered. And after a while, that silence starts to feel personal. It stops feeling neutral. It starts to feel like something is wrong with you, and the longer that happens, the less you trust your own decisions. Until one day, you don't even notice you're hesitating anymore. You just call it who you are. You were never building consistency. You were chasing confirmation. And as long as you expect confirmation, you will interpret neutrality as a reason to stop. Chapter 6. The phase that tricks you. This is where most people think they're finally free. But this is where they rebuild the same system again. Because once the intensity disappears, something feels wrong. Everything becomes quieter, flatter, and your mind reacts. If this doesn't feel meaningful, why continue? You asked yourself this recently, and every time you did, you slowed down. Because without realizing it, you replaced one dependency with another. Not before action, after it. Chapter 7. The moment that doesn't feel like anything. Riku expected something else. Clarity. A signal that told him he was finally doing it right. But when it happened, there was nothing. He sat down. No resistance, no motivation. And for the first time, he didn't check. He just started. And nothing changed. No feeling, no confirmation, just action continuing, without interruption. And for a moment, it felt unfamiliar. Not because it was difficult, but because nothing inside him was trying to stop him anymore. No voice, no doubt, no resistance. And that silence wasn't empty. It was the first time he wasn't standing in his own way. And for a second, you realize how long you've been fighting yourself without even noticing. And that's when it became clear. Nothing was missing. The feeling was never required. It was only expected. Chapter 8. What this reveals. This is where it becomes difficult to ignore, because now you can see it clearly. You were never stuck. You were waiting for a state that was never responsible for your actions. You knew what to do. You just didn't like doing it without emotional agreement. And instead of admitting that, you told yourself a different story. Not now. Not ready. But none of that was true. Chapter 9. The question you can't escape. And once you see this, there is a question that doesn't leave. If it was never confusion, and it was never timing, then the only thing left is this. You kept abandoning yourself in moments where nothing was actually wrong.